The one that started it all, the one that revitalized the action movie genre, the one that made shootouts great again, the Baba Yaga, the man of focus, commitment, and sheer fucking will. Ladies and gentlemen, the day John Wick was released, the first time we all saw it, we all knew we were watching the greatest action movie of the 2010s. The movie that announced in the biggest possible way that classic action is back.
But now, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
Action in cinema came back reformed after years of bland titles, with a few odd gems such as Taken and Dread thrown in there, and John Wick takes the world over with the most beautifully choreographed shootouts in cinema history, kicking the door down with real-life, grounded maneuvers that were dialed up to 11, and opening our eyes to an armory that, while remaining somewhat minimalistic, ultimately shows what even simple firearms can do in the hands of the most dangerous man on the planet. You're not going to see any RPGs, machine guns, lightsabers, wands, or vibranium shields. Just one man armed with enough handguns to take on a small army, fueled by rage so powerful it would make Kratos blush, and covered in plot armor thick enough to take on Thanos. It's time we bowed down before the greatness of John Wick and dove into his treasury of weapons. When it comes to handguns in cinema, you won't find many guns that can compare to the sheer sleekness of John's H&K P30L. This gun is by far the biggest star of the movie, after Keanu of course, and you can just tell how much attention was given to this statement-making piece. Right off the bat, we can tell that the compensator is custom made. In fact, it's just an adapter for blanks that was redesigned to look insanely cool. It is not an actual fire-capable compensator. By the way, the gun at the top is the actual gun used for the movie. You can tell by the serial number, which can clearly be seen here, and in the scene when John picks the gun up. Now, unfortunately, this compensator is not in production in real life, but Defender Co. does make replicas, and he actually had a line of functional replicas once, and we want to give Defender Co. a shout out because his breakdown of the P30L helped us a lot in the making of this video. The armorers had to go through a lot of trouble to make this gun look as cool as it does. The barrel on this gun should be black nitrite, but we can clearly see in the movie and in some promo posters the gun on John's P30L is actually silver. This is because the armorers had to weld the adapter to the barrel, which is why the material is no longer black. Because of the added length, the gun looks incredibly robust, which means that someone in the armory probably looked at the run-of-the-mill P30L and had the same thought process as Stephen A. Smith.
If this brother had a few more inches, oh, Lord, don't get me salivating and fantasizing about things. Oh my God.
Aside from the fantastic compensator and the coolness factor it brings to the gun alongside the added length, the P30L is just a regular P30L. The P30L is a long slide variant of the P30. It's 7.7 inches long with a 4.4 inch barrel, in comparison to the original P30, which is 7.1 inches long with a 3.9 inch barrel. This gun first started production in 2006, and at the time of filming, the largest magazine for the gun could hold 15 rounds, but nowadays there are 17 and 20 round mags available for the P30L. During the Red Circle shootout sequence, John fires well over 15 rounds before his first reload, which is impossible. However, all the other ammo counts with this gun check out, and even with that one mistake, this movie is above most other action movies in terms of realism, but more on that later. There's also a 10-round magazine extension available, so John could, if he sees this video, bump those numbers up even more. The gun is chambered for 9mm rounds, it's entirely ambidextrous, and John's gun comes with tritium sights. This is a tank amongst handguns. It's built to last, and while a bit too large in terms of concealment for an everyday carry gun, it's ergonomically great. In fact, a lot of shooters will swear that this is the most ergonomic gun in existence, although that's entirely subjective. If you shot it, let us know what you think about it in the comments below. The side panels are entirely modifiable, which means that you can take them out and replace them with another option that feels better in your hand, a design that was inspired by the grips on Olympic pistols. A common complaint people have is the trigger. The reset of the trigger is a bit too long, as many Reddit users will testify, but it's something most people get used to. I mean, just look at John. He kills hundreds of goons with it and he doesn't complain about the trigger once. He also uses it to deliver the most satisfying moment of the entire movie, finally shutting Yosef up. This death is so unceremonious, you can just tell John wanted to get it over with and go home, and he was angry it was taking him so long. As a backup, John uses the Glock 26, which he keeps hidden in his buried arsenal alongside the P30L, a knife, incendiary grenades, and enough gold coins to make Jack Sparrow jealous. Model 26 is a subcompact, teeny tiny baby gun. Seriously, it looks like a Glock that hasn't hit puberty yet. The grip can only fit 2 fingers, the magazine holds barely 10 rounds, and the gun comes with a 3.43 inch barrel. barrel, completing an entire length of 6.5 inches. The size makes it a perfect concealed carry gun, and that's what it's predominantly used for. John uses the Glock during the red circle sequence to create one of the most haunting images of the entire movie. This is a short digression from the Glock discussion, but this is a fantastic scene. Even though it lasts no more than 5 seconds, it tells us so much. Yosef has, up until this point, been acting like a spoiled brat, repeatedly refusing to accept the danger John Wick poses to him, despite his father and about a dozen other people who all know John personally telling him that John is, in essence, the most dangerous man on the planet. And then, this happens. And at this point, Yosef finally realizes that, as his father said, he's not dealing with the boogeyman, he's dealing with the guy you send to kill the boogeyman. I mean, just look at this still. Imagine thinking you're in no danger at all, and then you see that. This is some Batman stuff we're looking at, and not Christian Bale's Batman, this is Batfleck. This is the Batman that ripped people apart with his bare hands, only now he has guns and he wears a suit. Understandably, Yosef's character changes entirely after seeing that, and we never again see him relaxed. And in this scene, he's using the least intimidating weapon in his arsenal, his Glock 26. Those are the only 2 handguns we see John use, and aside from that, he uses a short-barrel Coharie Arms CA-415 rifle. This gun is the American clone of the Heckler & Koch 416. John kitted his gun out to the max with hollow sights and a vertical grip. The 36.9-inch gun comes with a 16.5-inch barrel chambered for NATO standard 5.56 by 45mm rounds. Very little is actually known about this gun, aside from the fact it's a clone of the H&K 416, but we do know that, at the time of recording this, the first 2 John Wick movies are the only movies it was used in, which is pretty remarkable. The H&K 416 itself was designed to address the MP5 issue. In the 90s, it became apparent to the Delta Force that the 9mm rounds the MP5 used were simply too weak. In fact, it was the legendary Larry Vickers who submitted a request to solve this problem. The M4 carbine, while certainly a more powerful gun, was too large for close quarters combat. Heckler & Koch needed to design a gun that was more maneuverable than the M4 but packed a stronger punch than the MP5. Project H&K M4, as it was originally called, changed its name to H&K 416, which is a combination of the designations M4 and M16, and that's how we got this great gun. The improved A5 variant of the gun, which is standardized now, comes with a retractable stock, minimizing its overall length to 27.9 inches, which is about 2 inches shorter than the M4's length with a fully retractable stock. Since the gun is chambered for 5.56, it's more powerful than the MP5, and as it's overall more compact than the M4, the key goals of the design were achieved. This success did not go unnoticed, as a lot of countries showed interest in the gun. It's used all over the world, very often with special operations. Pretty much half of Europe uses it, with Germany, France, Italy, Poland, Netherlands, and many other countries adopting it. Brazil also adopted it alongside Japan and South Korea, with the gun being in use all over the United States with JSOC, FBI's hostage rescue team, LAPD, Marine Corps, and other units. Famously, SEAL Team 6 used it during the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in 2011. It's overall a great assault rifle, and it's pretty obvious why John chose it for the assault on Viggo's men. Unfortunately, this gun is at the center of the second mistake this movie makes with its ammo count. John fires way more than 30 rounds, which is, just like the P30L, pretty odd for a movie that's obsessed with firearms realism. The next prominent gun we have is the Keltec KSG 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. John takes this gun from one of the men who failed to kill him at the church, and he uses it to stop Viggo's car. This gun is pretty interesting because of its dual magazine mechanism. 2 tubular magazines are located below the barrel, and the user has to manually select a magazine before shooting. A person can, for example, load buckshot in one and slugs in the other magazine and choose what to shoot with. Once one magazine is depleted, the shooter has to manually switch to the other magazine before firing. The magazines hold 7 rounds each, while the second generation gun's capacity was improved to 12 per magazine. This gun is becoming very popular in cinema just because of how cool it looks. Aside from the 3 John Wick movies, it was used in that godforsaken attempt at Die Hard revival a year earlier, Batman vs Superman, some Marvel movies, and the Fast and Furious franchise. We also see John use a Desert Tactical Arms Stealth Recon Scout sniper rifle to wipe the hell out of the floor with the guards protecting Yosef. This actually isn't his gun, as he kills one of the guards and grabs it off of him, so we won't be wasting too much time on it. What we're going to talk about instead are the incendiary grenades, because no matter how popular they are in video games, they're actually very rarely seen in movies. Aside from John Wick, they were used in Black Hawk Down, Skyfall, The Thing, and the 2011 prequel to The Thing, which we like to pretend never happened. Nobody's exactly sure what kind of grenades John uses because they were painted black to look cool, and that makes the identification process impossible, but it seems we're looking at an M14 grenade. The M14 is filled with a mixture of iron thermate, barium nitrate, and sulfur, compounds that can burn for about 40 seconds at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For clarity, a strip of magnesium burns at roughly that same temperature, and in order to burn wood into ashes, you need about half that. All of this to say that the incendiary grenade is very hot. It can burn through a half-inch steel plate, and it even burns underwater because it produces its own oxygen. This is a great moment to talk about how John uses incendiary grenades properly, unlike what video games have been teaching us. If you ever played Counter-Strike or Resident Evil 4, you probably believe that incendiary grenades are used to light terrorists or chainsaw-wielding men on fire, but in reality, incendiary grenades are used to destroy equipment. Of course, they're going to light a person on fire if they get too close. In fact, you don't even have to touch the flame to burn your eyeballs off, but it's not going to explode in a huge ball of fire the way some games depict it. Since the grenade reaches such incredibly high temperatures, it can burn through anything, which is why soldiers use it to destroy vehicle engines, communication equipment, and large weaponry. I mean, this thing melts through steel beams even without jet fuel. If you set it off on the hood of a car, it will melt through it and destroy the engine. Air crews also use it for marking their position at sea, as the flame is bright enough it can be seen from rescue aircraft. Anyway, John uses the grenades the right way, and this is to this day probably the most notable use of incendiary grenades in cinema. Before we start praising the living hell out of the movie's action sequences, we need to talk about Marcus, specifically about his loadout. It's never really specified how old Marcus is, but he's clearly a lot older than John Wick, who was 52 years old across the first 3 movies, according to producer Basil Iwanek. Marcus is a member of the Old Guard of Assassins, and there's even a theory that this entire underground network of assassins is much younger than the movie wants us to believe, and Marcus could be one of the first ones. What's not a theory, but a fact, is that Marcus mentored John Wick and a few others, and his age is clearly shown in his weapon choices. Marcus's handgun of choice is the Browning High Power. If there's an old guy in a movie, and you want to depict him as an old badass, there's no better handgun of choice than the High Power. This is a traditional, historic weapon that's been used in almost every conflict in the second half of the past century. Similar to the Colt M1911, it's a firearm you couldn't avoid if you took a stroll down history, and it only makes sense Marcus would use it. The High Power was, and still is, a very reliable handgun, and back in its day, it was respected because of its reliability, magazine capacity, and ergonomics. Of course, nowadays you have guns that are way more ergonomic, with bigger magazines and zero chance of a hammer bite, but with Marcus's age in mind, it's no wonder he loves this gun and keeps it by his side to this day, despite some more modern options being available at the time. He'd rather stick with the old gun he knows than the new one he doesn't. Half the freaking world agrees with Marcus too, because this gun was used everywhere, and that means almost literally everywhere. More than half of all countries in North and South America used it at some point, alongside half of Asia, Europe, Africa, and almost all of Australia and Oceania. The rest of Marcus's armory also reflects his age, and this is really cool because we rarely see firearms as character designations in action movies. Now, none of these guns are obsolete, but a young assassin in the early 2010s would probably opt for something more modern. If you look to the far left, you'll spot a Mac 11 and IMI's Uzi, beloved submachine guns and absolute staples of weapon design of the second half of the 20th century. Definitely something that fits with an old guard hitman. Marcus's assault rifle of choice is the Olympic Arms K23B, also known as the Stubby, which is a very short-barreled, very maneuverable AR-15 variant. It was actually the shortest AR-15 variant on the market when it was introduced with its 6.5-inch barrel. This is one of the more collectible pieces Marcus owns, as Olympic Arms closed down in 2017, making the K23B a piece of history. The Ruger M77 is Marcus's go-to long-range weapon. It's suppressed, fitted with a bipod and a synthetic stock, and it's the only weapon we actually see Marcus shoot as he gives John a warning shot when he spots Perkins sneaking into his room. Marcus also has a few variants of the Beretta 92, an XDM, which is the youngest weapon in his arsenal, a few Glock 17s, and a Colt M1911 to nicely round up his collection of classic guns. All in all, Marcus stays true to his status of being a member of the Old Guard. That term stands for someone who sticks to traditional, old ways, and when it comes to firearms, that is certainly the case with Marcus. And this isn't criticism, by the way. Marcus's gun collection is enviable, and the movie definitely deserves plaudits for how it incorporates firearm choices with the nature of its characters. Now, before we start breaking down the formula of John Wick's action, we'll just put this out there. The fighting sequences in the entire franchise are the most incredibly choreographed action pieces in cinema history. Heat? Absolutely fantastic in its own right, but in a different way, and the same can be said for Den of Thieves, which we recently broke down, and I suggest you take a look at that video if you haven't done so already. Those movies, however, are distinctly different from John Wick. John Wick is based on realism, but it dials everything up to 11, stretching the viewer's willingness to believe that all of that could happen within the movie's confines. Heat, on the other hand, which we love over here at Shooting Blanks, is not based on realism. It is realism, and when it comes to pure enjoyment, both types of action movies are enjoyable in their own way. But what John Wick does takes ungodly hours of practice, not just by Keanu, but by the hundreds of actors and actresses, stunt coordinators, and other crew members. The best part is, the first movie is the most grounded out of them all, with every new installment, and believe me when we say that we'll be going through all of them eventually, the action bar is raised and everything happens on a larger, more grand scale. The formula for success, however, remains the same. All the maneuvers and all the moves John pulls are real. Of course, you would need to be an extremely high-skilled operator to pull them off that quickly and that accurately, but what he's doing here isn't Neo stuff. It's greatest assassin to ever live stuff. These moments based on realism are spread across action sequences, and the space in between is filled with some of the less believable things, but because it's so well balanced between reality and stretching reality, we're inclined to believe that someone this talented, this skilled, and this fast really could pull all of this off. Here are a few moments we can point out to maybe paint a better picture of this theory. First off, the invasion of John's house. Take a look at this reload. Very nice, very smooth, very professional, and most importantly, very realistic for someone who's done that a million times. Then, not even a minute later, John does this. Now, is it realistic to shoot blind through a paper wall and hit the target? It would have to do more with luck than realism for the average person, but since this movie made it clear that we're dealing with the greatest ever assassin here, and this is further reinforced with many smooth, real maneuvers, for the viewer, it's entirely believable. We have a similar example during the red circle sequence. What we see here is a very smoothly executed Mozambique drill, after which we get probably the most iconic visuals of the entire movie. Followed by this shooting sequence in 3 different directions, mind you, which would be insanely difficult to pull off. His movement with his handgun, though, is real. This is not Steven Seagal over-the-top action. This is reality-based action on steroids. And even if at that moment you, as a viewer, think to yourself, well, that's a bit of a stretch, the movie immediately balances out with this moment as John runs out of ammo mid-fight and has to improvise, proving that not even John Wick is in total control all the time. The reload is, of course, clean as hell, which only adds to the perceived reality of the entire sequence. The overall picture of John being an incredibly capable individual is enhanced by his driving skills, which are just as good as his shooting skills, and by tiny details such as the fact that he wears his watch on the inside of his wrist so he can tell the time without turning his hand when holding a gun. This weight-counterweight balance repeats itself over and over again throughout the course of the entire franchise, and the credit goes to the entire team. Keanu Reeves, who is no stranger to hand-to-hand combat and firearms, spent endless hours at the range practicing his shooting, reloads, ammo checks, and maneuvers. None of this would be possible without his devotion to every minor detail. Keanu isn't the only piece of the puzzle, though. Chad Stahelski, the director of all John Wick movies, was a huge name in the stunt world before becoming a director. He was a stunt double for Keanu in The Matrix. He also worked on Mr. and Mrs. Smith and V for Vendetta, among others, while he choreographed action scenes in 300, Dread, and many other movies. This guy knows what he's doing when it comes to action, and in John Wick, he wasn't just the coordinator, he had control over the entire project. We also have to credit the entire stunt crew who had to practice all of these sequences alongside Keanu. And when you take the dedication of the entire crew into account, combine it with a beautifully designed lead handgun that's accompanied by a carefully picked sensible armory, sprinkle in a bit of meticulously crafted gun fu moves, and add to all that a formula that keeps the balance between realism and believable imagination, what you get is perfection. The best part is, it's only going to get more fun from here on out. The other movies have even cooler action scenes that will be even more fun to analyze, and if you somehow haven't seen them yet, what are you waiting for? Did you know that this movie was almost never made, though? The director Chad Stahelski said that they were $6 million short a week before production. The production then offered a bunch of actors to close the gap in exchange for parts of the profits, and it was none other than Eva Longoria who took that opportunity, which means that John Wick literally wouldn't exist if it weren't for desperate housewives, and our world wouldn't be the same in the worst possible way. If it weren't for Eva Longoria, we wouldn't have John, a man who is a feminist, believing in equal rights and equal fights, but also a gentleman.
Oh.
A man of impeccable style, but also a man with perfectly drilled gun skills and the plot armor of an M1 Abrams. A man at the front of, as Rolling Stone wrote, the last great American franchise. This man gets a 9 out of 10 for Firearms realism, but in our eyes, it's a 10 out of 10. The only reason we're deducting points are those 2 ammo count mistakes, but quite frankly, we don't care about them. We just have to do it because it'd be unfair if we ignored it. We are not going to take away points for combat realism. But he'd get killed in real life. We can already hear some of the comments. It doesn't matter. It's a movie kind of based on real life. It's not an actual representation of real life. Nobody thinks that someone can actually do all that. Get over it, relax, and enjoy greatness. We have at least 3 more movies to go through, and with a huge interest and alleged negotiations for a 5th installment taking place, who knows, we might have an even longer road to go down. What did you think of John Wick? Was the action over the top for you, or did it hit just the right spot? And what did you think of his iconic P30L? Let us know in the comments below.